enough to have grown under apartheid. Apartheid was a government of parastatals, my brother.
The first law of debate is to still man your counterpart's argument. Ndlozi transgressed this rule, but we won't make the same mistake. In this debate, Ndlozi makes a case for a state-controlled economy, citing various countries as alleged illustrations of how such an economy reaps the greatest benefits. To start with, Ndlozi claims that apartheid was a government of parastatals and credits it for the alleviation of the white minority out of poverty. Furthermore, he explains how the aftermath of the Second World War led to the strengthening of state infrastructure, seeing this as the reason why modern-day Europe is prosperous. Thirdly, there is an underlying defense of communism in his statement by suggesting that the successes of communist China and Vietnam are overlooked by the proponents of capitalism. Having the pose been set and the boundaries outlined, let us examine why he is mistaken.
The Afrikaner population in the 1930s accounted for less than 7% of the GDP. They were so niggerized. They were the poorest whites in the world. They were an embarrassment to the white supremacist culture. Apartheid took over. You must study your history. Through parastatals, through state-owned entities. Forget Venezuela, it's your only lazy intellectual example. Let's talk apartheid that uplifted white people in this country. They were uplifted through parastatals.
It was not merely a lack of parastatals that kept the Afrikaners poor, as Mbuyiseni would have you think. As per Johan Fourie, Professor of Economic History at Stellenbosch University, the primary cause of South Africa's poor economy during the 1930s was the Great Depression and South Africa's insistence on maintaining the gold standard. Not to mention long-term effects of mercantile agricultural distributors' monopoly, which limited profitability in the agricultural sector dominated by the Afrikaner population. Farmer isolation and an increase in state control in the agricultural sector further cemented Afrikaner poverty. They were niggerized, he says. But what the doctor fails to mention is that it was not solely the parastatals that removed the Boere out of poverty. This is apparent in the massive economic increase of 1932, which was a result of the abandonment of the gold standard. Furthermore, to say that the apartheid government was a government of parastatals implies that the government was centered around them, which is false. Rather, I would suggest calling it an economy with parastatals rather than an economy of parastatals. These state-owned entities are crucial because, as we have seen throughout the decade and a half of load shedding, businesses cannot work optimally without electricity. Thus, government infrastructure should not be seen as the economic center, but rather as a part of the foundation that allowed the market to function more easily. It is not to say that parastatals did not contribute to job creation. However, it is not as simple as he would put it. For it was the mining sector and racialized capitalism that cemented the Afrikaner population into the middle class.
That when you saw that you are about to lose power, you then privatized them. But forget Venezuela for a while.
Forget Venezuela. Is it a lazy example because it is the clear manifestation of economic failure? Should we forget Cuba's declining economy also? Laos as a communist nation being one of the poorest nations in the world. And who is it uplifting exactly? Forget them as well. Ndlozi appreciates intellectual rigor, so one might ask why he turns a blind eye to the USA, United Kingdom, Chile, New Zealand, Australia and Canada. Two blind eyes will have to be turned, if that is even figuratively logical. For him to come to the odd conclusions of neoliberalism never works. Moreover, free marketeers should be cognizant of making freedom a contemporary concept. I am aiming this statement to those that seek to trace Lady Liberty to New York and forget how freedom and individual liberty is a right given to us by the Creator and predates the so-called neoliberalism.
What is the world economic history? What is the world economic history? After World War II, Europe's public infrastructure was devastated. How did you rebuild Europe? State parastatals.
The US provided $12 billion to 16 European countries as economic aid through the Marshall Plan. Quite like South Africa, the European parastatals were outsourcers of the private sector that lasted through World War II, which again comes as a surprise to the communists. The private sector played a crucial role in building Europe to its modern economically competitive nature, fostering efficiency and quality, leading to better resource allocation. This rebuilding of infrastructure combined with the market policies helped Europe become as prosperous as it is today.
China is the fastest growing economy in the world today and the largest economy in the world today. Same as Vietnam, those are communist countries.
Okay.
Have the decency for intellectual honesty. Neoliberalism doesn't work.
The private sector accounts for 40% of Vietnam's GDP. So Vietnam is about as communistic as a CEO's briefcase, unless said briefcase was made in communist China, which he mentioned, which happens to also be incorrect. China loosened its economy through state capitalism, market deregulation, corporate legal reforms, and privatization of state-owned enterprises after a long period of economic stagnation and low living standards. Thus, the only thing communistic about China is the name of its ruling party. In conclusion, remember rule number 1 of engaging with communists. Do not call it communistic when Karl Marx, the father of communism, would not classify it as such.